Good day, folks. Thanks for coming to Finding the Warmth of Our Sun. I am Matthew Brung, your host here at Madison 365. You can find us on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Stitcher. Please hit subscribe, share, all that fun jazz. Particularly, if you like it for real, shoot it around, like it, and take it off Facebook a little bit if you're on there and watching it. So definitely unfortunately, but this week I'm going to be talking about using Madison again and its failure to invest in the proposed men's homeless shelter, which was held up by just a handful of Alders. There is some hope, but it was definitely held up how representation politics, what we think of as how representation of marginalized groups matters more than policy and ideology. Well, policy and ideology absolutely matter. It's a delicate balance, but representation or representative politics doesn't necessarily mean representation. So let's walk through what happened, and some of this is going to be based off of Madison 365 reporting, as well as some posts on Facebook by Linda Ketchum of Madison Urban Ministries. Absolutely amazing homelessness, people that suffer from homelessness advocate, and she does absolutely amazing work. Support Mom if you can, if you want to learn more about how to get involved in advocating for homelessness. Absolutely go to Madison Urban Ministries and peep them, check them out, and see how you might be able to help along on this next stage, which there's still some hope left that this could get done. But what ended up happening is last week, the Common Council took up a resolution to adopt, based on Madison 365 reporting, adopt capital budget for Community Development Division men's homeless shelter capital project to purchase property on Madison East Side for a homeless shelter. This purchase would have created a permanent property for homelessness folks to replace a temporary space that's now being used. And keep that in mind on the temporary space, because this also matters when it comes to racial equity and racial justice, particularly when it comes to marginalized businesses held by marginalized populations within Madison. So it needed a supermajority. So it needed 15 Alders to vote in favor. 14 Alders voted in favor, one short. Alders boss, joined by some names you'll definitely know. Sherry Carter. Apologize if I'm butchering this last name. I'm terrible in really any name pronunciations. Maidez, and Barbara McKinney, as well as Gary Helverson. Sure. There was an Alder absent, so this creates an opportunity later, and we'll make a note on that. So basically, the Nasra being absent from the 7th District means that on May 18th, there's a chance of basically to revote, right? Reconsideration is called on the next meeting because this Alder was absent. Please, if you want to support the building of this shelter, don't harass, but you're going to want to launch a friendly campaign as if you support. I'm not saying you should, but just saying if you want to support. But this is an issue of justice. It should also be noted that these Alders, this was done by some good reporting on the Isthmus, particularly looking at the campaigns, some of them had large amount of donations by property developers. And the biggest pushback on the development of this were by property developers, as well as NIMBY folks using very typical, class and racially coded language on why they don't want this. And I should say these developers have oftentimes stood as roadblocks to police reform efforts, other types of low-income housing development and racial justice initiatives, things that really you know, support change, right? And again, this has been noted by many different people on what these and just based upon who they support, particularly, and who they lobby. The handful of folks that voted against this have stood as roadblocks to police reform and other racial justice initiatives, particularly when it comes to projects that actually invest in people, right? Not just symbolic gestures of justice, like voting for, condemning white supremacy or something like that, but actually, things that actually make change. All right. And so in comparison, the council voted to approve expenditures, again, based on Madison 365 reporting, to repair a roof of police training office. So we support, cool, a leaky roof. Okay. Leaky roofs on city property should be repaired. But the fact is that this is a perpetual type of thing where we can continually to justify expenditures, elsewhere on things that are racially oppressive. Well, denying investment in things that are actually acts of justice. And now, why is this a thing of racial justice? Well, what this, the majority of Madison's homelessness population are Black. With a, 6-7% Black population here in Madison, comparatively. So this is absolutely a question of racial equity and racial justice. And to reemphasize a point of a past one, something that was rolling around. This isn't anti-racist. The anti-racist action here would be initiatives that would address why Black people in Madison are more likely to experience homelessness than white people. That's the anti-racist action. Now, the racial justice and racial equity action, well, both of those are these, that would also be racial justice, but the racial equity action is investing in these, in these initiatives that support our populations, because it helps with the general equitability of Madison. Beyond the fact that it's just the humane thing, the moral thing to do, and also the economically prudent thing to do. Clearing homelessness camps, which Madison just did, cost a lot of money, much more than just letting folks live and survive. Costs more in the long run than housing people. Letting people be homeless costs more in city expenditures than it does, again, investing in housing. Housing first initiatives and housing people that are experiencing homelessness, it's more cost effective than letting them be homeless and policing them. So there's a real economic conservative argument to housing people that are homeless. Now, we don't have any true economic conservatives anymore. It's all white racial grievance politics, and anything that's seen as an act of social justice, an act of real justice, and morally right and just and good is going to be seen as bad, as socialistic, as Marxist, as blah 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 down the line. Again, to reactionaries, because this is a thing of justice, a real thing of justice. But the arguments against this were, it would drive down property values, which doesn't necessarily hold up, but it's absolutely racially driven because these are majority of Black people. So it's seen as a blight, particularly because they're homeless and low income, as well as crime issues. But kind of further on things when the Ketchum noted, and particularly I should say a Facebook post, really the Alders could have voted to purchase this property. Continue looking around for better opportunities, but lock this in and buy this, just in case, because the kind of proposed other opportunity on Pennsylvania Avenue is deemed really not feasible and too expensive right now. Yeah, that parcel of property is 3 times the cost of the Zaire road site, and looks like it's going to need some soil remediation, which can also be expensive and time consuming. Basically, if this site is viable, the Pennsylvania site, it pushes back development of another year to open a men's shelter. And Linda continued making a great point in one, contacting Alders to support the site, but the fact that the current temporary shelter is located on First Street, which has been a long proposed site of a public market, these Alders don't really have a solution for what to do, both in how to handle the proposed public market development as well as this temporary site. One of these things have to give. And the thing with the public market is that many of these are locally owned businesses, many of them owned by people of color. And they were asked by the city to be part of the public market based upon racial equity and social justice lens review. But these Alders supported in favor of multinational chains and mall owners, that we need to protect their businesses, but they didn't vote. Basically, what this is doing is creating a cause and effect down the line where they're not supporting or protecting businesses owned by Black and brown folks within the city because of what this is. The temporary site is where the public market is supposed to go. So is the public market going to be delayed? Are we going to push those that are experiencing homelessness off of this temporary site? Where are we going to put them? Because moving them off the temporary site doesn't change anything. They just move to a different location without any permanent housing capabilities. So this is just doubling down on issues of racial justice, and particularly anti-Black racism and anti-Blackness. And again, these handful of Alders, it's just the latest round of initiatives that they've pushed back on that actually center racial justice. Now, there's a very sad part of this, and this is where the representation really matters. And this is where people, particularly white people, white moderates and white conservatives, and even some liberal white people will get confused because they view Blackness too much as a monolith and view representation as the ultimate do-good or kind of that physical representation without asking the question, who do they actually represent? There's an automatic assumption that if you're Black, right, you represent the Black community. Well, not necessarily. You represent those who vote for you, such as with Carter. You could talk about how she won the race within her community. So of course she represents the Black people within the community there. But you can, as you dig into it, kind of the numbers show that the precinct with the highest turnout, that really swung the vote her way, was the really only majority white precinct, where she got the vast majority white voters, but not necessarily Black voters in kind of that voting precinct. But then you also have to look at that, who donated money to her. You look at some of these other Alders, Said and Barbara McKinney, who donated, who supported. Some of the others, you have the police union, which has its own agenda. So who supported these folks, particularly with money and endorsements, a lot of times also shows who they represent. And then you look at the policies they support, both through actions of voting as well as just kind of their campaign policies. Not their slogans, right? Because some of these folks have co-opted language of racial equity and racial justice within their campaign, and hid behind their Blackness and their brownness to really deflect any accusations in how their policies and how their actions support anti-Blackness in this city. So people mistake representation politics with actual representation. So let's, think about this specifically in context. If over 50% of our homeless population is Black, yet we have Black alders voting against this for, stated reasons, and oftentimes just cognitive dissonance, kind of mental hoop jumping, they don't represent the needs of those Black men because they're not. They're making excuses to not represent the needs of those Black men. So, this can be kind of confusing to reconcile. The result of being uncritical of representation politics, really how, within how it works, where, you want better representation, you put someone in that represents, Blackness out front. But if we are uncritical, then these Black politicians aren't representing Black folks, and particularly those that are most marginalized in our community, those that are suffering the most from anti-Blackness. They're not representing them through their policy choices. They support policies or vote in ways that harm Black people. How can they represent the needs, or how are they representing the needs of Black folk? So we need to be critical of this. Look beyond symbolic gestures or easy votes to fund nonprofits and programming, which is a lot of ways paternalistic in how we address racism, as a lot of these issues aren't necessarily a lack of skills, but a lack of resources. And some of it's skills, but primarily it's resources. Non-white folks who have reactionary politics are not good for representation. So we have to explore these politics. Otherwise, we're going to perpetually be stuck in this loop, regardless of the demographic makeups of the city, regardless of the demographic makeup of the council or an elected body. If we don't have people in place that are actually representing the needs and supporting policies that meet the needs of people, this is where we're going to be. Doesn't matter what color they are, what political party they are, what gender, sexuality, it doesn't matter. Representation is important, but it can't be pushed above all if we're not putting people in place that are actually representing and supporting the needs and supporting policies that meet the needs of people. That's what we have to do, and that's what this is. And right now, these handful of our alders voted not to support the needs of homeless Black men. I mean, that's the bottom line. That's what they voted on or voted for. Well, the majority of the council did vote for this. Again, it shows how hard justice really is. Our systems are set up in a way to make this stuff very, very difficult to do. And we see at the larger scales on how just a handful of senators, Democratic senators, are roadblocks to major reforms, major institutional reforms, such as voting rights, and other large initiatives that would go a long way in really supporting all families, but particularly those that are most marginalized in our nation, Black and brown folks, and those experiencing homelessness and poverty and really, just down the line. This is magnified throughout the nation. Madison isn't alone in this, but we see this. So you have to think about that. So if you support the housing of these men and support the city buying and building this shelter, then call our alder in District 7 and remind them that we need this, that this is morally right. It's economically the right thing to do. It's the economically responsible thing to do. It's the morally responsible thing to do. And it's the just thing to do. Well, that is it for this week. Thanks for coming to Finding the Warmth of Our Sun. I'm Matthew Brown, your host here at Madison 365. You can find us on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Stitcher. Hope you all have a great week. If you haven't yet, get your vaccination. They are, available to all right now and easily accessible. So please do that. Please, please, please. But thanks for coming. Have a good one.
This is 365 Media.